Hello and welcome, What the Finances, to another episode of the What the Finance podcast, where we talk to experts to help gain a greater understanding about what is happening in the world of finance, investing, and markets. So, on today's podcast, I'm happy to welcome Lukasz Bednarski, who's Lithium and Battery Materials Expert and author of the book Lithium: The Global Race for Battery Dominance and New Energy Revolution, which I've just finished and I really enjoyed. So, Lukasz, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me. I love the show.
Oh, no problem. So, I guess my first question is, what was your influence for writing the book?
Yes, so I'm coming from the commodity trading background, and in the past, I've been trading different types of commodities as a physical trader. And at some point, I really became interested in the opportunities that the energy transition, seemed to bring. And I focused on the materials and metals which are used in the lithium-ion battery. And very quickly, I realized that lithium is the element which is the most important one for the energy transition, and perhaps one of the at that time, least discussed. So I looked also at the book market, and I could not find much of the literature dedicated to the topic, especially no book which would be targeting a wider audience with a story of lithium and battery economy.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you mentioned there that when you first started getting into it, there wasn't much interest. There's definitely a lot of interest now.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and I guess, can you explain maybe to our listeners what is the state of the lithium market as well as just battery materials market in general
Yeah.
at the moment?
So this is the space which is growing extremely fast. Of course, the lithium market started from being a very niche industry. In the past, lithium has been mostly used in ceramics, in glass, also in more niche nuclear applications. But with advance of the lithium-ion battery technology, as lithium-ion batteries started to be used in mobile phones, later electric bikes, electric scooters, and finally, on the wider scale in electric cars and in energy storage solutions, this industry and the market really took off. And at the moment, the lithium is widely talked about. Lithium prices are historically at the highest level, and many people talk also about the upcoming lithium shortage. So that became a really a space which is interesting to many people.
Yeah, because I've talked to some commodity experts and they talk about how commodities in general traditionally are normally connected to growth. So if economy's growing, normally there's going to be high demand for them, so it goes up. Is lithium the same, or do you think there's more of a maybe look at the future in terms of that supply shortage you're mentioning there, or is there still a link towards what's happening in the economy at the moment?
Mm-hmm. I mean, of course, the wider macroeconomic landscape has an influence because the main driver for the lithium demand is an electric car. And obviously, we are experiencing the energy crisis, and with electricity prices becoming higher. I guess this is the factor that consumers consider when thinking about buying an electric car. The same goes for the general inflation and consumer spending crisis. So definitely, the macro environment impacts this industry. But when you look at the growth rates until now, and the industry capacities on the mining side or on the processing side for lithium and other battery chemicals, the whole industry is in the expansion mode. And I don't think that the current a little bit negative macroeconomic environment will hamper this growth in the long run.
Yes, in the book, you sort of mentioned it. It's quite interesting. I guess, if you link it maybe to oil industry, where there's upstream in terms of actually getting the product out of the ground, and then there's also, I guess, downstream in terms of refining it and turning it into, giving it to the consumer. It almost seems like there's something similar with lithium as well. So it's actually getting out of the ground and then also creating the right quality for the battery providers, and then also making the batteries. So I guess for each of those stages, who are the major players that people should be aware about?
Yeah, so I think what's important here is to underlie the complexity of this of the battery supply chain at large. Even if we consider the journey of only one element, which is using the battery, lithium, it starts with a mine. Major players on the mining side are Albemarle, Ganfeng Lithium, Tianqi Lithium, and there is also a few others there. And then the material which is extracted from the mine needs to be processed into the battery chemicals. And you have a huge industry there. Many players, many companies really participate in the processing stage. But what's interesting, around over 90% of this processing happens in China. So this is very much a Chinese-dominated industry. However, different regions in the world try to catch up here with new projects in the pipeline. And it's not the end, because after the material is processed into lithium is processed into the battery chemical, it goes to the cathode material. And then again, we need to differentiate between the cathode materials producers and the battery producers. Some of the battery producers, they produce cathode materials internally, but not all of them do. So again, you have many players in the cathode material space. Here, South Korean companies are becoming more and more stronger, companies as EcoPro, for instance. And then you have obviously the battery makers, right? So companies like LG, Panasonic, who are assembling the final cell, and even furnish fully integrated battery packs on the market.
Yeah, so it sounds like as you said, a very complex supply chain, and especially when you think about if you're putting in vehicles, you're either sending it, some in Shanghai, but also you're sending it to Europe and the US and UK and basically all across the world.
And as the materials travel, as the components travel, of course, CO2 is emitted, right? So ideally, we would like to shorten this journey.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess if we start with mining, I know, during the book you mentioned sort of the Lithium Triangle, and I guess there was another thing is the Saudi Arabia of lithium. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, mostly in South America and Central America as well. So I'm not sure if you can talk about those countries and maybe where the opportunities lie there.
Yeah, so I mean, Lithium Triangle definitely plays a key role. So the countries which are part of the Lithium Triangle are Chile, second largest producer right now after Australia, then Argentina, and then Bolivia, which is not producing lithium at the moment, but which has the largest, untapped resources in the world. So, these three countries, this is what we proverbially call Lithium Triangle.
Yeah, and I think they're trying to hopefully take advantage of that, and they want to, I guess, ride off the back of the trend that's occurring and hopefully help their countries, grow in GDP, etc. Yeah. So I think what you mentioned there in the book is they're trying to actually build the whole supply chain within their countries. Is that happening at the moment, or do you think maybe it's a bit audacious?
Yeah, so generally there are two schools of thought. One is that, we should focus mostly on excelling in mining and on building as much mines as we can, and on expanding capacities, making sure that we deliver a quality product to the market. And so we've made to specs with little impurities and so on, that we produce in the cost competitive way on the global scale. And the one factor which becomes more and more important credential, that the lithium is produced in the most environmentally friendly way. So with the minimum usage of water, with the minimum of CO2 emission. So there is some proponents in these countries, they say, let's just focus on that. And the others say that, well, lithium is only a commodity, raw material. So let's move up the value chain and let's start to produce cathode materials, other battery components. Let's produce even batteries, more competitively than the countries which we don't have the lithium resource internally. Let's build electric cars. And so there are these two forces, and they are in all of these countries of Lithium Triangle that we've mentioned. And it's really hard at this stage to say, if we think about the next 20, 30 years, in which direction this development model will go.
Yeah, it seems like some of them are doing quite well at mining, but they haven't gotten, as you said, it takes 10, 20, 30 years to build these manufacturing hubs and specialty.
It takes less, but I think the results, and we will be only able to say which of these two models really won 20, 30 years from now, right? Because now it's still, everything's evolving.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge as well, you mentioned there that lithium can be produced in a very environmentally unfriendly way. So I'm not sure if you can maybe talk about those two.
Yeah, I mean, environmentally unfriendly is maybe all mining does some sort of damage to the landscape or an environment, right? It's really, you cannot do it completely harmlessly. As you excavate and transport the material, then need to utilize the tailings and so on. But that's true that there is a tremendous pressure on the companies participating in the supply chain, from automakers and finally the consumers, to make mining as environmentally friendly or neutral as possible. And here, as I said before, the focus is mainly on minimizing the water usage in case of the brine mining, in minimizing usage of harmful chemicals as acids, and generally making it with the usage of the renewable power, right? So to use renewable generated electricity to process the material and to mine.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So if we look at, I guess, lithium in general, maybe batteries as battery materials as well, are there any misconceptions or maybe misunderstandings that, when you talk to people about, they're just they have these misconceptions about things?
I don't know. It's hard to say, really. I think many people mixes lithium with cobalt, and I think cobalt has more ESG related issues than lithium does. So in cobalt, in the past, you have the instances of child labor participating in the mining. In case of lithium, you never had that. I guess, first of all, lithium mining is not happening in the countries at the moment where such thing can happen. And secondly, I think it's also from the engineering perspective more complex. So you need to use advanced machinery in order to do that. You cannot just rely on the labor power. Other misconceptions, I don't know. I think people are sometimes confused between the term battery and the cell. So is it equivalent or not? I think the easiest way to think about it is that the cell is the single unit that you use to construct a battery pack in the electric vehicle. So of course you have many different cells in many different formats. But I think for a layperson, the easiest way to visualize it is just like you have, a standard batteries, cylindrical batteries used in your remote control, and maybe a little bit bigger, but pretty much, reminding them put together in hundreds and thousands of units, and basically this is what constructs the EV battery pack.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess if we look at the market going over the next 5 or 10 years, what do you think the greatest risks are? Would it be maybe Chinese geopolitical risks, or do you think there'd be other maybe supply shortages?
Yeah, I think it's. I think with China, the situation is quite complex because they dominate the processing of battery materials for now. Let's see how quickly this will change. But they don't have much of the battery materials resources inside of the country. When we speak about lithium, they do have lithium resources, but not in adequate quantity and quality to satisfy their full internal demand. So yes, we are dependent on them for processing, but they are dependent on the, you can say, Western world, right? So Australia, Latin American countries, for the supplies of the resource for processing. So it's like both parties keep each other in checks. And it's very often people talk about the Chinese acquisitions of the battery materials abroad, but still we need to remember that these acquisitions, first of all, rarely include the whole mines, the whole companies. Typically, Chinese invests in a part of the equity, or they give loans, or they sign some sort of the offtake agreements. But it's rare that they have the full ownership of these mines. And second of all, still, even if they did, these mines are situated in the independent countries, which can put quotas on how much material can be exported from the given jurisdiction, and which can put export taxes, for instance, only on the material that goes to China. And so I think that many of the fears that are represented in the media about this Chinese grip on the battery materials is a little bit exaggerated.
Okay. Are there any other risks then, do you think, that are maybe warranted?
Yeah. I mean, for very long, the problem in the industry was the availability of the financing. Like people were ignoring the fact that maybe there will be not enough lithium in the future. And they thought, okay, it's like any other commodity that you can easily scale up the mining operations. That first of all, automakers, I think, for very long thought that this is not our problem because we do not make batteries. Battery companies make batteries, so let's leave it to them. Let them handle any materials shortages on their side. And also in 2017, 2018, we had this situation when the lithium prices went down considerably. And then, they didn't recover much until COVID, and the COVID came and it changed things. But during all this period, like for many of the junior miners, so the companies which were starting to develop the mines or were different stages of the development of the new mines, they had trouble getting the financing. So it wasn't so much about the lack of the quality resources or a lack of cards or any, like technical challenges. They simply didn't have enough money to continue to be on track with the project's development. So I think the lack of financing in the past was a problem. Now I think it changed, but it's still an issue. It's still depending on the larger macroeconomic environment, interests of the investors. This may change, right? So
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you mentioned something there about how, I guess, car makers and even governments, they just thought batteries were commodities. They didn't think about the technology and that they were quite an important part to have in your supply chain. But now that's changed.
That was another, I think, misconception at some point, that many of the automakers, they do not only consider battery raw materials as commodities. They also thought that the batteries themselves are the commodities. So they thought, let's just outsource the production or leave the production to the companies where are situated in the countries where you have basically cheap production inputs, not only labor, but also, energy and things like that. And at some point, I think they realized that the battery is not as simple as it seems. That the battery, it's in a sense, it replaces the engine, right, for automakers. So it decides about the overall performance of the car. And the better batteries you have, the more your products are more attractive. So they realize that they cannot just leave this technology to subcontractors, to ignore it, or just to focus on R&D in the Western countries and then the production in Asia, because it's also important to remember that sometimes even if you have R&D breakthroughs, it's very difficult to translate the new inventions into the factory floor if you do not have the access to the factory floor.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess, we've mentioned that there could be supply shortages, estimated to be supply shortages in the coming years. What impact do you think that will have on the market? And I guess, we've seen it in, I think it was nickel last year on the, London Metals Exchange, where it just shot up ridiculous amounts very quickly. Do you see that happening to something like lithium, where there's this real demand for the product, but there's just not enough out there?
Yeah, I mean, it can happen in the future. How the industry will react, let's see. Definitely it will have a reflection in the availability of the material, in the the price of the material, things like that. I guess it will have a potential to slow some of the projects. We could see what happened when there was a chip shortage. What were the implications for the automotive industry? So yeah, it can be a big problem, right, for moving on with the electrification of transportation.
Do you think it will happen, or is it hard to predict?
Yeah, it's different companies have different forecasts on that matter. I think it will happen, but maybe let's not put a date on it here.
Yeah, exactly. That's a dangerous game, trying to put a date and predict things. But I've been talking to some people, and they say that we'll probably hit this mass shortage, and then once that occurs, there'll be a massive support from governments. The US will throw billions. I'm sure China will throw billions into Europe as well. So it might be, I guess, similar to what we're seeing in energy security these past year. It might get to that point, and then they're just going to throw all this money behind it, and hopefully it doesn't last too long.
So, as we can observe that in the last years, there is more and more of the legislative support for development of battery materials mining, battery sector, EV industry in the Western countries, right? So both in EU and in the US, we can see such initiatives. In the US, there was a bipartisan critical mineral legislation introduced, I think, last year, was it? And this year we have the Inflation Act, and it's a huge act, I think around 700 pages, but there are parts which will have an effect on stimulating the development of the battery industry, processing industry, automotive industry in the US. And if you look also at the involvement of the certain institutions in the EU, you can see that the European Investment Bank has been supporting some of the battery projects with competitively priced financing. And so I think the wider institutional framework now is supportive for the development of the battery supply chains, regionalized battery supply chains both in the US and in the EU, also in the UK.
Yeah, I think sometimes, that they know they have to do something. It's just putting into place the actions. Do you think any more changes need to happen specifically, or do you think they're going in the right direction?
Yeah, I think they are moving in the right direction by simplifying permitting process for mining, by providing subsidies. It's really hard to speculate, how long this support will last, whether you will have any new legislation on the horizon that would further support the development of the battery supply chains. It's hard to tell, but the trend is certainly positive.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess if we look at people, they're interested in investing in lithium or even battery materials, because they believe that the price is gonna go up, and potentially companies that produce that are gonna go up as well. What sort of options do they have? Is it mainly ETFs? Is it actually directly investing in commodities? Is it these junior miners? Well, I guess what are the options out there?
You mean for the retail investors or for the
Maybe a bit of both.
a bit of both. I mean, the standard financial instruments, I guess, here, really, the space is not different from any other industry.
Yeah.
And if you look, how many mining companies are listed on the stock exchange, then, many of them are, it's like majority is of the new mines are listed. Few are held privately. So yeah.
Yeah, just mainly that. And I guess it's just trying to look for the red flags and make sure, because I'm sure there's a lot of buzz behind it. So there's a lot of people trying to make a quick, some quick money, but it's actually looking past that and trying to find the companies that are going to do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, how can I comment on that? It's I'm sure everybody is following regulation, and everybody is playing the right game.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think, will there be enough lithium for all the batteries we need? Is it physically possible, or do you think we're gonna, you've mentioned in the book Japan, how they're starting to recycle and all these other economies. Do you think that's going to be necessary, or yeah?
I mean, it's. I think as we move forward, then the recycling component will play a bigger role in the overall supply. I think on the extreme end of the spectrum is lead. Like most of the lead that we use now comes from recycling, not from primary mining. I think we are very far away for that to happen for the battery metals. But definitely, the recycling space will be developing. At the moment, it's more developed in Asia than it is in the West, as is the case for many other segments of the battery supply chain. But like technologically, it's not a problem to recycle most of the battery materials, and for very long, some of them were not profitable to be recycled. So, for instance, lithium was one of the elements from the battery that didn't pay to recycle at the lower prices that we had in the past. Now this changed, but nickel has been recycled from the battery before, with a commercial success, and cobalt. And yeah, so I think recycling will play an increasing role. It will probably for very long not satisfy the full demand for battery materials. And do we have enough lithium, like at large, for the electrification in the world? I think yes. I mean, in the past, very often people talked about the peak oil situation, right? And then as the price of oil increased and as the extraction technologies increased, somehow new deposits has been found, and our economy never stopped because of running out of oil. And I think the same applies to lithium. The electrification will never stop because of the running out of lithium in the ground.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. So, Lucas, thank you so much for your time today. And I guess my last question is, what is one message you want people to take away from our interview and your book as well?
I think it's important to further popularize this topic, and I encourage everybody to learn more about the battery, about electrification, and how it fits within the wider picture. I hope that my book may modestly help with that.
Yeah, I think it was a great introduction, and it went quite in depth to about the lithium and its importance, and I guess the major players in the game. So, I'll put the book link in the description below. If anyone wanted to follow more of your work and what you do, where could they do that?
They can go on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Lithium Research. So yeah,
That'd be the best place. Awesome. So, Lucas, thanks again for your time.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and click the bell icon so you are notified when new podcasts are released. I hope you're leaving with some great value about investing, trading, and finance. See you on the next show.